All right. Welcome, everyone. We'll give it just a minute while everybody is entering the webinar today, but thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to talk about this really relevant topic right now. And we've got some wonderful, wonderful guests for you today. While you're joining, feel free to drop in the chat where you're calling in from. And also what brought you here today, if you don't mind sharing. All right. Let's see. Just want to make sure. All right, we'll give it just another 30 seconds or so. And Michelle, my screen is sharing okay?
Yes, everything's looking good. And we
Great.
have a number of people we have people from Ohio, Oklahoma, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida. This is great.
Awesome. Always excited to see people from across the country join us for these webinars. So it is 12:01 and we are going to get started. Thank you again for joining us today for Lobbying 101, How to Influence Your Elected Officials. We are really excited to be able to offer this webinar today in both English and Spanish. So if you are interested in listening to the Spanish audio, you can do so by navigating to the bottom of your screen and clicking the little world, either more or the little world button right here, and clicking Espanol, and you'll be able to enter our translation rooms as long as we're good. All right. We welcome questions. I'm sure you'll have a lot of them. If you're able to do so, please drop those in the Q&A rather than in the chat, just because the chat is going to be a very busy place and we want to make sure that you can talk to each other through that medium. So in the Q&A allows us to answer questions both live and then also in that space. So it's a little bit more organized. So feel free to do that. But ask as many questions as you'd like. This is an exciting topic, and we've got both staff and volunteers who are here to provide you with some perspective. So just a quick round of introductions. Liz, I'll let you go first.
Thanks, Annie. Hey, everybody. Glad to see so many people here and so much interest in this topic. I'm Liz Veazey, and I'm State Policy Campaigns Director at SUN. I currently support our policy work in Virginia, DC, Maryland, Florida, and Puerto Rico, along with some national initiatives. And soon I'll be managing our regional policy staff.
Lovely, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Kowach, and I'm the Community Impact Fellow here at SUN. I help support our different national events such as this, and also help do outreach with our volunteers in our unstaffed states. And I look forward to having you all here today.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Again, Annie Wolf. I'm our VP of Community Impact here at Solar United Neighbors. So work very closely with Michelle and our policy teams and other teams to run these educational and training and informational events that we have here today. I'll also let Meredith and Bill introduce themselves. We'll hear from them a little bit more later, but Meredith, if you want to go first.
Hello there, Meredith Haynes, and I'm located in Vienna, Virginia, just across the Potomac from Washington, D.C., and I'm a longtime volunteer lobbyist. Learned everything I know with Citizens Climate Lobby starting in 2017. And Bill.
Thank you. Yes, Bill. My name is Bill Barron. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am the state network director for the West and Mountain West for Citizens Climate Lobby, and I've been involved in advocacy since 2010 with them. And I'm passionate about the outdoors and motivated to work on climate solutions.
Awesome. Thank you both. And like I said, we'll be hearing more from Meredith and Bill a little bit later. So just if you are familiar with Solar United Neighbors, this is a refresh, but if you are not familiar with Solar United Neighbors, this is just a little bit of background into us. Solar United Neighbors was started over a decade ago when our founder, Anya's family wanted to go solar and really started wading into the whole solar landscape at that point. And Solar United Neighbors was born of that effort. And so our theory of change is not only to help people go solar, but we really believe that that is just the first step in your solar journey. So we believe in our Go Solar, join together and fight for energy rights, which means, putting panels on your roof, subscribing to community solar, discovering a love for solar and a support for solar is just that first step. We want to bring people together to fight for solar friendly policies, both locally, regionally, statewide, and on a national scale. And that's really getting to the heart of what this webinar is about. So with that, Liz, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Annie. All right. So citizen lobbying, what is that? Simply, lobbying is simply communicating with decision makers or elected representatives to influence their position on an issue. Sometimes lobbying can have a negative connotation and can be connected with expensive lobbyists and big, powerful companies and interests. But anyone can lobby, and I think it's really important for citizen lobbyists to push back on, the armies of lobbyists that some of the monopoly utilities have. All right, next slide. All right, so our pyramid of engagement shows different ways to reach out to your representatives and, varying levels of impact of that outreach. So really the best thing with the highest impact is in-person or virtual meetings, and then followed by personal phone calls or letters, followed by social media engagement, and then sending form emails. But all of these things are important, and I definitely encourage folks to engage however works for you, and then challenge yourself to move up on the pyramid. All right, so lobbying steps. I'm going to talk through these in more detail, including preparing for, attending, and then following up from a lobby meeting. And I want to note that all of this information and more is in our lobbying guide, which I think Annie can share in the chat. It's a great resource. So next slide. Okay, so digging in to getting ready for your meeting. So thinking about research and preparation. We recommend learning about the elected official, thinking about how you could connect with them. Could you connect with them around where they went to school, organizational affiliations, past work they've done in the community, and or votes they've taken? Could you find stats or information about your issue that connects with the messaging or framing that they use and or commitments that they've made? For example, if they said economic development and jobs are really important, then you could talk about, in Florida, for example, the $18 billion annual contribution to Florida's economy and more than 40,000 jobs supported by rooftop solar. Do they talk about freedom? You could try to connect to the freedom to generate your own electricity and reduce your reliance on a monopoly utility. I think it's good to show that you know about them in some way and try to connect if you can. You'll also need to figure out what you want to ask for and get out of the meeting. It could be that you just want to build a relationship with the office and get to know them and talk about the importance of rooftop solar more broadly. Or maybe you want to ask about protecting specific policies, like the federal solar tax credit that was extended at 30% by the Inflation Reduction Act or the IRA. At Sun, sometimes we work to build relationships with state legislators. I worked on that in Florida when we scheduled a series of meetings with them in the fall of 2022. We shared Florida rooftop solar statistics like the ones I mentioned, and we had solar homeowners share stories about resiliency and electric bill savings. And we talked about the importance of rooftop solar and net metering. And that was a good way to sort of start building relationships with the offices. All right, next slide. So sample agenda. It's a good idea to have a draft agenda to help guide the meeting. On the slide, I think it's a pretty good outline that includes introductions and thanking the official for something and or connecting with them in some way. So that could include some of the research that you did. Personal stories can be really important, and that might fit in as part of the introductions and or, why the bill or the issue is important. Stories are things the officials will hopefully remember and can be really helpful and powerful. So one example of this was in West Virginia. Before the passage of the IRA, Sun helped set up a meeting with Senator Manchin's team. He was sort of a key vote in the passage, or whether we were going to get something like the Inflation Reduction Act or not. So we helped set up some meetings with his team. We recruited a rural small business owner, JQ Dickinson Saltworks, who had received a Rural Energy for America program, or REAP, grant to join us and tell their story of REAP helping them go solar and save money on energy so they could better invest in the success of their business. And a lot of other folks were involved in pressuring Manchin, but Manchin eventually did vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which expanded the funds available for REAP grants for agricultural and rural small businesses. And my colleagues can share a link to Sun's great REAP guide if you want to learn more about that. So in terms of back to the agenda and important things to include, a clear ask is important. So for example, will the senator protect my right to produce my own power and lower my energy bills and oppose HB 741? That was a bill in Florida that would have ended net metering that we helped fight, and eventually we got the governor to veto that a few years ago with a big win. But if you're just relationship building and you don't have a specific bill, you could ask more broadly, will you stand up for the rights of solar homeowners, listen to their questions and concern, will you stand up for the rights of solar homeowners? So you could see if they would commit to that. And then make sure you listen to their questions and concerns, and answer questions if you can. They often have good questions. Thank them for taking the time. So yeah, that's a pretty good agenda outline. Next slide. So inviting others to join, this isn't necessary, but it can be helpful to have multiple constituents join the meeting and bring different perspectives and show support. And Sun may be able to help find people in a specific district. I found meetings of like 2 to 5 to be a good size. Next up. So here's a link to a tool that I think somebody can put in the chat if you need help identifying who your representatives are. This includes, I think, federal, state, and local, but is a nice little tool to help you figure that out. So once you figure out who you're meeting with, next slide, then you'll need to reach out to them to schedule a meeting. Ideally providing some times that work for you or others as a starting point, but sometimes they have very limited schedules and they will just say, this is the 1 or 2 times, I could meet. It's good to provide context about why you want to meet, maybe in a couple sentences. Let them know if you're open to a virtual meeting, if that's the case. It's good to ask to meet with the legislator. Often you'll probably only get to meet with one of their staffers, but meeting with staffers is great. The staffers really do a ton of work, and they're often the ones who are more in the weeds on, drafting and refining some of the legislation and can help work with you on some of those pieces. I think I added persistent here. Maybe it's not here, but anyways, I've had to be persistent to set up some of these meetings in the past, and I've had to email 2 and 3 times. I even emailed one office 3 times over the course of like a month. I never heard anything back. I thought they just ignored my emails. But then something came up related to solar policy about a month later, and they actually reached out to us. So, keep trying, realize you may be building some sort of connection, even if they don't respond. Next slide. So attending the meeting, we've already sort of talked about the agenda, using that as a guide. If you're having a good conversation, it may make more sense to not, be super strict about following the agenda exactly. It may make sense to just sort of continue the conversation, but you will have to, determine that. And if you have a couple people, it can be useful to have somebody take notes, someone facilitating, and then someone responsible for making the ask. Don't worry if you can't answer all their questions, but take good notes and try to follow up afterwards with information. If it's related to solar policy, Sun can definitely help you respond. You can reach out to us at advocacy@solarunitedneighbors.org, and somebody can put that in the chat. Next slide. More on attending the meeting and sort of thinking about what happens in different scenarios based on how the office responds. If they oppose or are undecided, or they don't want to make a commitment, you can, we encourage you to be respectful, but express disappointment. Follow up by asking, what information do they need in order to reconsider their position? So take note and include information in your follow-up about that. And then if they support, make sure to thank them, tell them how their support will positively impact you or your community. So you could, for example, say, thank you so much for your support. This bill will help stabilize my family and many others' energy costs and really drive local economic development. So thank you for that. Next slide. Okay, I already sort of covered that. You can next slide. After the meeting. So we've touched on this a little, but it's important to try to take good notes so you can then follow up on any specific questions or things that were brought up. You can research questions after the meeting and or ask for groups like Sun or others to help if you don't know the answer. Make sure you send a follow-up thanking them and answering any questions and including any relevant resources or materials. If they're a supporter, you can ask them to encourage their colleagues to support the bill. If they were undecided or they wouldn't commit, you can remind them of the impact of their support. Good follow-up helps demonstrate that you're a resource on solar or energy issues, and hopefully helps build the relationship and means they're might reach out to you with questions in the future. Next slide. All right, yeah. And I was just going to mention again that all of that information is outlined in more detail in the Solar Advocate Citizens Lobbying Guide, along with notes and resources. So I look forward to your questions, but first I'm going to pass over to Meredith to talk a little bit about her experience.
Yes, that was a really good coverage of the basics, and I hope to give some color to how that looks like in my experience. And first of all, thank you to Solar United Neighbors who helped me get solar on my roof, because I found a co-op and I was the first in my neighborhood, so I hope to be an influencer. I started a long way from being comfortable in the role of lobbying legislators. I never liked public speaking, and eventually realized that I maybe had a superpower and that I have a funny accent and people are listening. So if I could get over nervousness. Maybe I could be a better participant. But one of the things that really made me comfortable is including having a team include a role playing exercise where you start out inviting people who are happy to be a timekeeper and ask the legislator how much time they have and want to be respectful of their time and then give a 5-minute reminder that that's an easy role for a first timer. Of course, note taking is important, but if you have everybody looking down taking notes, who's giving the nodding and reading the body language of the legislator? That's being an active listener is you can add more people to your team by adding that role. And we talked about storytelling. It'd be great to have a subject matter expert there with you on your team, but mostly if you have a team that has people who are passionate, who can talk about how they're sharing their care of this issue in the community, who they're talking to, how big a voice, how much bigger than just the people in the room this message is. And especially if you've done your homework a little bit on who the person you're lobbying listens to. Including some of them would be really strategic. So don't be concerned that you have all the answers. A good lobby meeting would be one that sets you up to have another one, or a further engagement on giving them information. Always put up front that I'm a volunteer, they're on my own time, this is so important to me, just to set that difference between all those paid lobbyists who can be there so much more than we can. I flagged that relationship building, and this includes building relationships with the staff. It's often the case that we see that staff move on up, become more important, or will move to the state level or back and forth, and you'll encounter them again. And they are the gatekeepers to the schedule of the person you're trying to meet. I have taken some of this lobbying experience to the state level, and it's a little more frenetic pace there, and I would encourage people to have a elevator pitch in case that's where you actually run into the representative you're trying to talk to. And we often we talk about the ask and having what we call a leave behind, a one-pager where it's a simple statement on one sheet of paper, printed out, usually PDF version, that has your position clearly stated, is an important tool in your toolkit. One of the things, sometimes checking in with them when you have nothing to ask for, just to thank them for something that they've done, makes them remember, oh yeah, that's a nice group. We'll schedule a call with them anytime. That was my brief top tips. So I can wrap it up there.
Thank you, Meredith. That's great advice. Bill, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you. Yes, it's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I think Meredith did a really good job covering some of the points that I'll just also highlight, and really the having an appreciation for the member that you're meeting with is really key. It really changes the context of the meeting. So that also shows that you're doing research on the person that you're meeting with, because you're wanting to try to look for something that they have been doing recently that you can genuinely appreciate, ideally in the content of what you're advocating for. So in this case, solar energy. But even if you cannot find something that they are doing in that area, they're having a genuine appreciation goes a long way. So this is something that you want to be sure you can say it with authenticity, rather than just saying it because you're trying to get attention for it. So it's really important to be looking at it in that way. Some of these other points that I have here, Meredith talked about, but I'll just highlight again. Being careful on the time, so tracking the time of the meeting, asking the member of Congress or who you're meeting with how much time they have to meet, and then really landing on that time is very effective. I can think of many times that I've been in meetings where they told us they had 30 minutes, and when we reminded them that 30 minutes was coming due, that they were willing and interested in continuing the conversation. So being respectful in that way really has a lot of weight. Um, Building a relationship with the member or with staff is so valuable. And looking at it that way is also really valuable because, I think there's a tendency for us to want to go into a meeting and get exactly what we want. And that doesn't always happen. So looking at it from a longer perspective, that you're trying to connect with these people, start a relationship, become a trusted source for them on this specific topic is ideally the goal that you're going for. And taking notes I think, is incredibly valuable because you can use these notes, depending on how you're organized, keep track of the notes so that if you are following up in another meeting, or you're meeting in 6 months or a year later, you can go back to those notes. You can find out who you met with. If you're meeting with the same person, you may not need to go over some of the basic things that you might have covered. You might be able to go in farther along in the conversation. Or if you end up being in a meeting with somebody who you haven't met before, it's important to kind of start from where they are. So by having notes and knowing who you spoke with and what the conversation led to really helps in building that relationship over time. Respect and appreciation. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby really works in, is that we want to be communicating with respect and appreciation. And I think that that's a really important way to, continue to build that relationship. And it really makes it easy for, like Meredith said, to get further meetings, continue a relationship. It's really important, if you can, to be sure that in meetings that you have constituents. I have known of meetings where people have joined who are not constituents, and that is not as valuable for the members to hear from non-constituents. So if at all possible, be sure that you have constituents that are participating. Like Meredith said, really great if you can identify community leaders that can join in your lobby meeting, because they are seen as influencers for the member of Congress. So that can be mayors or municipal leaders. It could be a business leader for a large corporation or business that's in the district, because that is a representation of the entire size of that business or organization. So there's a lot of value there. Um, Going back to requesting meetings, um, like has already been said, these meetings can take multiple requests. And I mean, I know of meetings requests that have been in the dozen requests asking, before a meeting happens. And I think it's always really good to avoid trying to be discouraged by that experience, but rather, assume positive intent. And there may be things that have happened that have led to this happening. A staff member moved, or somebody got sick, or any of these things, so that you don't carry that, that feeling of being avoided when you continue to make requests. It's just, again, important to do it respectfully, and continue, and don't give up on that. Last thing that I'll just mention is that I think it's really important, that to celebrate the successes of the people that you're meeting with, rather than demonizing them for not doing enough. That sometimes happens, and that really is something that I think is a big turnoff for members of Congress. So just being able to celebrate what they're doing creates the space for them to be encouraged to want to do more in that direction. So Those are sort of the key points that I wanted to add on to what Meredith very well covered very well.
Awesome. Thank you both. And we have lots and lots of questions that we'll be asking you, Bill, Meredith, and Liz. But first, we want to cover a couple more topics. So, Liz, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Annie. So yeah, I think I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act earlier, but as many of you know, the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, passed in the summer of 2022. There was an original Build Back Better proposal that was much larger, and it was sort of like whittled down to be able to pass. And what passed included $739 billion total, including $300 billion in deficit reduction and $369 billion in clean energy and climate initiatives. And then the rest of it, I think, went for healthcare. But you know, as I think many of you are aware, many of these provisions, the clean energy and climate provisions of the IRA, are under threat of rollback by our current Congress. So we really need your help to convince Congress to protect parts of the IRA. Next slide. So there's sort of four major priorities that we are supporting that help distributed solar within the IRA. So most of you are probably aware of the residential investment tax credit, or ITC, that was it was actually set to go down to 26% in 2022, but with the passage of the IRA, it was extended at 30% from 2022 through 2032. So we want to protect that, the residential and the commercial or non-residential investment tax credits for solar. And then sort of related to that is a provision in the IRA for direct pay, or it's also called elective pay, which allows nonprofits, government entities, and tribes. And this includes municipal utilities and rural electric co-ops, can directly access the equivalent of the investment tax credit and receive a check back from the IRS. So that's a really important provision that, you know, I think is helping more churches and schools and other nonprofits and tribes and government entities do solar and directly benefit and get that credit. And then a couple of other things that we are really excited about include Solar for All, so an important program expanding access to solar savings. It includes 60 grants that total $7 billion to bring solar to income qualified homes. And there's a requirement that homes save an average of 20% on their electric bills. So we see that as a really important program, expanding access to solar savings. Sun is a co-lead for the Florida Solar for All program, and we're involved in a number of other grants. So we really want to protect that. And the one other thing, which I've mentioned a couple of times already, is the Rural Energy for America program, or REAP grants. REAP provides grants for agricultural and rural small businesses to go solar and do other energy upgrades. And the IRA, REAP existed before the IRA, but the IRA increased the grant amount from 25% to 50% of the project costs. And so since that happened, USDA has been really overwhelmed with applications due to the popularity of these grants. And we've been doing a lot of outreach, and we have our REAP guide, which is a great resource. And so we're excited and hope to see those continue at the 50% level to help increase access to solar for rural small businesses and agricultural businesses. So those are the four key programs that we're working to protect in the IRA: the tax credit, the direct pay, Solar for All, and REAP. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we need your help to protect these provisions. You can take action with our online form, which Annie will hopefully share soon, and our poll, which will happen in a few slides from now. You can let us know if you're more interested in meeting with your federal representatives, and we'll provide more training and more support in the next few months. Things in Congress are in flux, but we expect it would be April at the earliest before a big package would be up for a vote that would potentially, end some of these programs. But we need to contact the legislators now in, February and March to really help shape what that package looks like. And I was just going to mention that there are some key targets in Congress, including Republicans who joined the Garbarino letter last year. And I think Annie can put a link to that in the chat if you want to see it. But there were about 18 Republicans who joined that letter to the Speaker of the House. And, included in it was this quote. So they were saying, prematurely repealing energy tax credits, particularly those which were used to justify investments that have already broke ground, would undermine private investments and stop development that is already ongoing. A full repeal would create a worst case scenario where we would have spent billions of taxpayer dollars and received next to nothing in return. So, those are key members of Congress that can help, and they've already expressed interest in, not repealing the whole IRA and protecting pieces of it. And they see the importance for economic development and jobs there. So I think we're going to lean into contacting many of those folks. My representative, Don Bacon, is one of them. But yeah, I think if everybody here took action, maybe wrote a personal letter, and even, half of you express interest in lobbying, that would make a huge difference. Annie, I think I'm throwing it back to you.
Indeed. So I will stop sharing my screen for a moment and we will get to some of the awesome questions that have come through on the Q&A. So thank you all and keep coming because we've got a great set of experts here to help provide some answers. So one that stood out was how to go about meeting with your representative when they're the one who authored and in this case, an anti-renewable bill. So, definitely going into a meeting where your representative is on the opposite stance. Has anybody had any experience doing that? Or any tips?
Well, I think that even if the person is not supportive of what you're doing, it's important for you to share what is important and what you are representing as an organization. So along the lines of just being sure that you're meeting with a respect and appreciation for them, and that you're willing to talk to them about something that you are very supportive of and you believe in is still important to do. And that's how you work to build political will for moving things in the direction that you want them to go.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Bill said. I think, you could, maybe it's best to frame your interaction as like, oh, I want to learn more about why you support this bill, or, I want to talk more about the implications or the impact that this bill has on me and my community or my business, or right, instead of just reaching out and saying, I want to talk to you because I don't support this bill. Right. So think about, trying to you could say, I guess, call them in and have a conversation. But yeah, I mean, it can be a tough conversation.
Yeah, Meredith.
I have relied on Citizens Climate Lobby to have a message tuned for every office. And so when staff can help you craft that message, it's really helpful. But I have also used AI to turn a message that is in the language that I would speak into something that for instance, conservative would be more persuasive to a conservative office. So best use of AI I've come up with.
That's interesting. I have definitely not used it for that yet. New new things all the time when it comes to AI for sure. Let's see. So this one is from Eugene on advice on lobbying a small rural electric co-op that they're advocating to end net metering. So this is a little bit of a different scale, but I would imagine similar tools and tactics apply. In this case, it's in Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, I would just flag that technically rural electric co-op board members are not publicly elected officials. So, lobbying them is, technically for like an organization or a staff member, lobbying a legislator would be, is something you have to track your time on and is sort of like an important thing that we have limited ability as a nonprofit to do. But we also, Sun has a Solar United Neighbors action that can do unlimited lobbying. And so we're able to use that. But anyways, rural electric co-ops are not, technically those board members aren't public officials. So wanted to flag that. But yeah, I mean, they are tough because they're not public officials. They're not required to have public board meetings and they're not required to have public contact information. And so it can be really difficult even to just like find out about what's happening and to get involved. And, we could do a whole webinar just on like rural electric co-ops and getting involved. So I guess I don't want to go down the rabbit hole there. But yeah, I think Sun is interested, and maybe could reach out to you individually. I think you've maybe already been in touch with Bobby, our state director in Minnesota. But I think, rural electric co-ops are hard, but, I think they're supposed to stand up for the 7 cooperative principles and they're supposed to be owned by their members and doing activities for their members. So I think that, utilizing those cooperative principles and those ideas to say like, you should be supporting more solar that helps your members lower their bills. But yeah, I think we should probably move on now.
No problem. Thanks though, Liz. And that rural electric co-ops is definitely one of Liz's wheelhouses. So she's a great resource for that. So these two questions are very, very similar, but also, so when you're meeting with your representative, should you be keeping it to a specific bill versus general topic supporting renewables and mentioning multiple bills? Sort of what's a good example of an ask? How do you want to frame that ask? I know we went over this a little bit, but expanding on that would be super helpful.
Well, I'll say as far as CCL goes, we tend to have a primary ask, so a specific ask that we are using across the entire country, so that there's a continuity in what we're specifically looking for. And then we also have secondary asks, and those secondary asks tend to be something that's maybe an easier ask that might be something that would be more comfortable for more offices to get behind. It's not as big of a step, with the idea that those secondary asks can be ways to move a member in the right direction, and with the ultimate goal of getting to the bigger ask. So I think that has worked really well with Citizens Climate Lobby. And if you try to get in multiple asks, I think it kind of gets confusing. And if you're more advocating from a general perspective, I think that, again, I think that it's better to have something specific that you're looking for that you can speak to, because what you're really wanting to do in those offices is you're trying to, I like to say, be interested rather than interesting, so that you are trying to hear what the member or the person you're meeting with feels about the things that you're speaking about, rather than just downloading on them all the specifics of the bill that you're wanting them to support. So you're really trying to go in there with the idea of building the relationship and starting this conversation and sharing about what you're wanting to advocate for, and asking them do they have concerns? Are there things that would hold them back in supporting this type of legislation, so that you're really able to kind of delve deeper into where they stand on that specific legislation or topic?
Yes, Meredith.
And just to follow up on that, our meeting plans often have a list of open-ended questions that we've prepared and a target for how much time we plan to spend talking versus listening, because it is really hard to back off and do some listening, but it makes it a conversation, and that's better.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it depends, right? Like sometimes there's a really bad bill that's gonna hurt solar, and we are having meetings and we want people to like contact their legislators and say, talk to them about why are they supporting this, or are they not, and like ask them to vote against it. So it's like sometimes really super focused on one bill. Sometimes if you're meeting, in the off season, like what I mentioned, what we did in Florida, that was like when there wasn't any legislation and we were just trying to build relationships and talk about the importance of solar. And so we were, didn't mention anything specific in terms of legislation, but mentioned specific issues like net metering and rooftop solar. And right now in Virginia, we're involved in working on a package of like 3 different bills. And so, I think it would be okay to mention those 3 if you were working on those. But I think like Meredith and Bill both mentioned, like once you get beyond one thing, usually in like a 15 to 30-minute meeting, it's really hard to have much of a conversation about more than like one bill.
There's only so much time, huh? We got a question in the chat, and then it relates to actually one in the Q&A. So this individual in particular lives in Massachusetts. So the policy climate for solar is overwhelmingly positive, and that definitely does go for some districts, some states, across the country. So this person's asking, is it worth it to have these meetings to talk about your support when your representative is already for it? So is it worth it? And if not, are there other things that people could be doing if they are in a pretty supportive district for either solar policy or renewable energy issues?
Well, I hate to keep going first, but I'll just say that, I think it's always important to try to meet with everybody, even if they're for it, and they support it, then that gives you the opportunity to thank them for being supportive of it. And then also it may be an opportunity to inquire from them, who do they know who we should talk to that might be lukewarm about it, but might benefit from learning more about what's going on, and try to use them as a resource that you can use to identify other people that could be moved in the direction that you're trying to go.
Yeah, Bill makes a good point about like it's important to meet with them and possibly ask them some different questions and get their help on learning about other key targets. I mean, beyond that, you could also, if people in other districts that are target districts that have representatives that signed on the Garbarino letter, or for whatever other thing you're lobbying on, if people in other areas where there's elected officials that are less supportive, you could reach out to them and try to get them to engage, in addition to meeting with yours.
Well, and something that I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the Volts podcast, but they did a great story at the beginning of the year on organizing locally for supporting clean energy projects. And one of the points that continues to stick out in my brain is that the detractors are yelling the loudest, and that's who representatives are hearing from. So if a representative is taking their duty to represent their constituents effectively, and all they're hearing are from the detractors, we sort of lose by default. So making sure that representatives are hearing from the supporters continuously, as well, is really key. And making sure that our voices are loud as well. And I'll share the link to that podcast because it was fantastic. And also shouts out our Pennsylvania work as well, which is great. So, another question. Let's see. We have a bunch of them. So this is more of I think a more of a myth, I think, or just a more of um calculation. So someone asked if is it correct that rooftop solar isn't actually economically practical without net metering, which is definitely a challenge in states that are removing it. And so, anybody have any practical experience with that, or some stats that might actually refute that or support that?
I mean, that's a very complicated question. There's a lot of layers to that. I mean, Sun has worked to protect net metering and fair credit for solar, and we've been successful in Florida a couple of years ago, as I mentioned, and we're involved in dockets in Virginia and beyond now, as I mentioned, some of the Q&A. And, there's some places that have rolled back net metering, but we, have tried to protect it. I mean, I think it can't, it can often be less of a good investment, but, on the other hand, we're also working on promoting programs like distributed power plants that provide value to people for sharing their solar and their solar power and their batteries at certain times of day when it can help the grid, and those layering on programs like that can help increase the pay, decrease the payback period for solar. And there are things like the federal tax credit that's really important, and that's part of what we're trying to protect in the IRA is the federal tax credit, which is an important national incentive or credit for solar. So I think there's a lot of different layers and pieces, but Sun is trying to help improve that and help more people access solar.
Thank you, Liz. I know it's definitely a complicated one for sure. This one's another one. Avoiding the climate change verbiage is really hard to accept, especially when we want to be talking about it in general, and it's definitely related to some of these issues. But it is also a hot button issue. So certainly when talking to more conservative legislators, anybody have advice or approach the conversation in a way that meets that person where they are rather than the climate change language.
All right, well, I'll jump in again. I think it's really important to just know your audience. Like, frame the conversation in a way that they can hear it. So if you're going to go into a really conservative office, obviously talking about climate or using the words climate crisis is something that is definitely a flag for them. Where I find the most success in conservative offices tends to be in talking about the economic value to clean energy and how that can be a boost for our economy in the United States or job creation, things that, energy security, things that can be really more digestible by those audiences. So, really, it's very important to know your audience and be thinking in ways to frame the conversation around them. You can go even deeper than that by researching the member of Congress or the person you're with. What committees are they on? What caucuses are they in? And so those are, at least for caucuses, you can kind of get a sense for where the interests lie with the member of Congress. So it may be that there's an agricultural focus, or there may be a military focus. And so there's ways to bring up, supporting things that we are advocating for, using it in the context of the ways and areas that they are most specifically interested in.
We're getting some really good feedback in the chat too about what's resonating in communities where people are living, which is definitely something to take a look at. the lived experience is invaluable. And thinking about where you live and what resonates in your community is definitely incredibly valuable. Let's see. We have a lot of questions still, but we are definitely running short on time, and some of them are getting a little bit more in the weeds on specific policy issues or specific wattage and and things like that. But we do have somebody asking, and I'm not sure that we have the answer to this question yet, honestly, which is the fact that the current administration has put a freeze on all IRA disbursements, and how does this affect people who put solar on their homes in 2024, and whether or not they'll be allowed to get the tax credit on income taxes. And my sense is that we don't have an answer to that yet. Liz, is that correct? Mm.
Yeah, I don't think we have an official answer. I mean, I think that, from my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, but the orders have stopped disbursements. A tax credit technically would not be a disbursement. It just reduces the amount of taxes that you pay to the federal government. Although this would be more complicated in the context of the direct or elective pay, which is when the government sends a check back for the value of same thing as the tax credit. But so I think we're still trying to understand, and some of the other groups are still trying to understand, because it just happened, like, technically what it means. I think historically legal precedence is that, the president doesn't have the ability to just stop payments on things that Congress has already approved. But I think, the reality is they are stopped. Like, many of them are stopped right now. And so I think we're going to have to wait for some legal cases to try to work out some of this.
Yeah, it is ever evolving. That's for sure. So with a few minutes left, and we do have a poll to get to, as well as some resources, but I do want to give the three of you an opportunity to, if you could give your pre-legislative lobbying self a piece of advice, what would you give yourself if you're preparing for your first meeting and getting ready to go have that meeting? What advice would you give yourself?
Well, I will say that for me, I think the advice is that when you haven't done it before, it's kind of feels intimidating, and that's something that is just natural. And people who have been lobbying for a time, every time or a lot of time when you go into these meetings, you get butterflies. You're kind of stepping a little bit out of your comfort zone. At least I'm speaking for myself. But the more you're prepared, the more you know who you're speaking with, keeping in mind your goals of the meeting, paying attention to the time that you have, like be prepared for a certain amount of time. And usually with a meeting with a member of Congress, it's 20 to 30 minutes. And so prepare for a meeting for that, roughly that time. And then when they tell you how much time they have, you adjust accordingly. So it's sort of, I think, being as prepared as you can be, and go there with trying to be looking professional and communicating in a way that we've found to be very effective, which is, that respect and appreciation, and just be as prepared as you can. And, if you have questions that come up in a meeting and you don't know the answers, it's okay. You say to them, I don't have that specific answer, and it creates an opportunity for you to be able to follow up with that person with that answer when you can get that answer from your organization. And that's a way that you can continue to work towards building trust with the office, is by following up, providing the information that you don't have if you can't provide it. But certainly don't make it up if you don't know it. It's much more valuable to just share that you will get that information to them at a later date, and just have fun with it. It's a transformational experience to be advocating for what you believe in, and it's an amazing experience. So with those things, I think you would have a good time doing it.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. And Meredith, go ahead and then I'll quickly share my screen before we hop off.
Yes, I just agree. I was very uncomfortable, out of my comfort zone. And then when I realized what a privilege, how many more people would be here if they could, and you're speaking for them as well, and you're supported by a team, and you don't have to have all the answers, but bring your passion for the issue, and you'll do all good.
Definitely. Thank you both. So let me just share my screen for the last little bit here today. So if you are interested in some of our resources, you will get an, ooh, that went all the way to the very end. I love when that happens. When we will get all of these resources in an email in the next couple of days. So definitely download our advocacy guide. You can sign up to volunteer opportunities with us to be kept in the loop about more trainings, excuse me, and more opportunities to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and lobby your legislators. Look up your officials, take a look at their voting record, see who's representing you. If you have any questions at all, definitely do not hesitate to reach out. And in the meantime, I do want to launch a poll. All right. So feel free to answer this before you hop off. Sorry, getting over a cold. And we hope to see you at another event soon.